Hello and welcome to the first podcast in the series for Change Ignition. I'm Charlotte Moore and
I'm Roga Rell.
And on our first podcast we have Jason Little, author of Lean Change Management, and somebody who we really respect and have been working with for a while now. I first met Jason, actually came in contact with him about 2 years ago, just as he launched his book, Lean Change Management. And I bought the book and also had a Skype conversation with Jason and really loved the work that Jason was doing. Then brought Jason over to Australia in June 2015 for the first Australian Lean Change Management workshop, which we ran in conjunction with the Change Management Institute, and it was from there really started to work with Jason. So welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me.
That's great. So Jason's in Toronto, and Ro and I are in Perth, Western Australia. So we've got a great weather day today, but I'm sure, Jason, you're heading into winter.
Yes, it was really warm yesterday, and then today it just seemed to drop 10 degrees. So it's, but I just came back from Finland where it's about 10 degrees colder, actually close to 20 degrees colder than it was here. So it's kind of nice to be back in the warm weather by comparison.
Fantastic. Okay, so today what we'd like to do is, as it's the just past the second anniversary of the release of the Lean Change Management book, to use one of the tools that we use in the Lean Change Management workshop, using a retrospective approach to looking back as to what's actually happened over the last 2 years for you, Jason, since launching the book and obviously holding the first workshops, and just to understand a bit more about what you've learned over those last 2 years. What sort of things, what you've actually really liked, and in terms of going forward as well, what different actions you will be taking as a result of all the learnings you've had over the last 2 years.
I think the most important thing that I learned is how similar the desire is for people who are coming from either on the Agile community side and people that are coming from the change in the OD side, that they're after the same thing. They just kind of go about it in two different ways. So over the last couple of years, it's been pretty interesting to connect with both audiences. So going to Agile conferences or going to change conferences and just hearing the types of conversations that are happening and hearing the same patterns of the same problems pretty much. So I've learned that there's a lot in the traditional change world that Agile folks are starting to kind of latch onto. But at the same time, people that are coming from more of the OD and the change spaces are kind of reaching over into the Agile bucket without realizing that everything in Agile, or most of it anyway, is based on ideas, models, coaching, psychology from 30, 40 years ago, that a lot of what change management is based on too. So it's neat just to see how similar the communities are. And I think it's pretty cool that there's a lot more cross-pollinating of ideas, especially with the conferences that I go to. I was at a regional one here in Canada, or I guess a national one a couple of weeks ago, and one of the hosts said when he was at the global version of that conference, he wanted to do a conversation around Agile and how to bring these techniques into change management, and he said 4 people showed up. This was the global conference where, there's 2,000 people showing up, and this national one in Canada was about 200, and I think we had 50. So there's more people that are interested in trying to figure out how to bring these ideas in. So that's been a pretty good thing that I've learned anyway over the last couple of years. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the things that, we will do this from time to time. We think that's one.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we're noticing, Jason, is that certainly when we're getting coaches on the Lean Change workshops, they are very, very appreciative of what their OD colleagues actually bring to the piece, the change management piece. And yet we're also hearing from change managers that they're wondering how they actually add value in Agile projects. So there's a sort of a disconnect in a lack of communication, that they can both help each other. What's your take on that?
There's two main branches when I think about that, and one is just the typical IT change or operational readiness or business readiness change. For me, that's the easy part, is change person, like get out of your desk and walk over and sit with the Agile team. That's it. And then do whatever you need to do. You're right there, you're with the team. You don't need to be an embedded team member. You don't need to be 100% allocated to that project if you're in a big company, and that's the way things work. But when you're sitting near the team or with the team, you hear what's going on, and that is going to affect how you can bring that information back to any of the operation groups or any of the business stakeholders. I spend most of my time in large organizations, so ideally with smaller companies, you can have everybody in the same space at the same time. So you have the stakeholders, you can have the team, you can have you have access to end users directly, you have access to people doing support or the operations people. But in big companies, if there's 1,000 people working in a program, if you can at least bring the change managers and have them be part of the team or even sit there, it's a lot easier, because then they can watch how the process works and then they really understand it. Because it's pretty easy to go to look at the values and principles and Scrum and some of these Agile processes, and they are brain dead easy. They're very, very simple models. They're designed to provoke the interaction. And we tend to overcomplicate it sometimes. We need an Agile change framework on top of what this Agile team is doing, when you don't really need it. You just walk over there and sit there, watch how the process works, because then you can communicate that out. So that's the easy part and the one branch. The other branch is more of the transformational stuff. So when you get into digital transformation, I know it's exploding in Australia as well, and it is here in Toronto too. All the banks are going through the same thing, and the insurance companies, and that is bringing in more reorganization, which is something that not a lot of Agile folks have done or know. They know the values and principles, they know the practices, the processes, the mindset, all that stuff, but they're kind of missing the you have a very tall hierarchy in a certain business unit that you want to make digital, and they don't realize the blast radius or the implications of how much needs to change. If you look at Galbraith and 7S and some of these other organizational design models that talk about, if you change your strategy, it's going to affect everything else in your organization. So bringing Agile elements in there is moving more towards, a change facilitator stance. So getting the people who own that system, and by system, it could be the program, the project, whatever they're trying to transform, and facilitate through it instead of trying to figure out how to build some type of change framework and force change on people and things like that. So there's two kind of avenues, and I think the IT one is a lot easier because it can be that simple, but I know it's hard. I've asked that question in some of the workshops too, when I don't get why it needs to be that hard. Just go sit with the team. It's always the hierarchy that's in the way. It's usually the change people. If it's IT change management and systems change, yes, they will sit under the IT hierarchy. But if it's business readiness and operational change, they usually sit on the business side. So that's two different stacks of hierarchy, and it's hard for them to kind of jump over the fence and just do that, because the teams see it as being invaded sometimes. Why do I have this person here sitting in here watching everything I do and documenting stuff when it's not really what they're after?
Yeah. So that's an interesting sort of conundrum, and it's one that we're also experiencing, that sort of the systemic change. And there's the sort of what I call transactional change. So that kind of leads to a question around, is there a certain type of change practitioner, for want of a better word, that will thrive in that type of scenario, where that uncertainty, that you're actually working with the system to help the system change? Does that mean that we have to move away from the sort of the methodology, sort of almost waterfall change approach, to a very different approach in transformational change?
I think so, yes. I think it's a matter of options. So I like to provide options to organizations. So one team I'm working with now, they have 34 downstream groups that are going to be consuming the software. Mm-hmm. So in this organization, probably a bigger plan is what they're going to need, and a rollout strategy and all this stuff. But we have had the opportunity to pull some of those groups into the bi-weekly end of sprint demos to show them, here's some stuff that we've done, and to get feedback from them. And it's a hard process to go through because it's so unusual. And it's things like, the ops people, they're busy. They can't be here every 2 weeks. They've got stuff to do. We can't waste their time. But I find more often than not, as soon as you can crack through that door, they actually like it much more because they get to see stuff and they get to start to relate it to their day jobs. Because a lot of, if you look at any change readiness approach or, any training program, most of the things I've worked on, they're not going to go to those things anyway. They're going to wait until the system is live in the wild, and they're going to log in, and then they're going to start swearing at the team for not doing it right. So that's going to happen anyway. Yeah. And instead of trying to stay kind of in that fixed mindset and build the awesome plan, the change managers need to think a bit different. Mm-hmm. And realize that always happens. So we can either keep doing the same thing and then blame people for not going to the training, or blaming them for not being aware enough or having enough desire or whatever it is. But they need to be more supportive and more reactive. But that sounds bad. We can't be reactive. We have to be proactive. Well, you can't mandate and force that type of stuff. Even if it's a system implementation where they're going to have to use it, there's still a different, more agile pull-based approach you can take to help people understand that, as opposed to just the old way of planning it out with surveys and push-based approaches, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, Jason, in your experience, where is it that that's worked well? What examples? What ingredients are necessary to enable that sort of switch from maybe that more methodology approach and that fixed approach? What have you found that works really well, where you may have gone in and that's been the initial stance, but what's been the catalyst, I suppose, or the real ignition for that ability to move to that different way of working?
I think what I've seen the most is trying to, we'll say a lot of things like we have to get people to buy in, and that's how we get them to change their minds. But for me, it's to try and understand what's in it for them in the first place. So if I've got stakeholders or people that I need to see a roadmap and your plan for whatever this is, figuring out a different way to satisfy their desire for certainty more than anything else. I was at a conference this weekend, and part of the things I was talking about was uncertainty reduction theory, which is Calabrese and Berger, I believe. I think it was in the 70s, where they talked about strategies for reducing uncertainty. A lot of the times we will say things like people have to embrace uncertainty and they have to develop the growth mindset. But I'm sure people that like to, they plan their vacation 3 years in advance and right down to the second where they're going to be at the hotel and stuff. And that's pretty scary for some people. So I think instead of just blindly embracing it, let's figure out how to reduce it. So he talks about, in their theory, there's a few strategies to do it. And there's passive, active, and interactive. And the basic idea is, I'm sure you've worked somewhere where you've had a new manager that joined at some point in your career, right? You've either had a manager left and someone new came in. And nowadays, when that happens, a passive way to deal with that uncertainty is Google the person. Look at their LinkedIn profile. So, sometimes I'll call it the stalking method, but if you could say, no, it's part of uncertainty reduction theory, and it was, blah, blah, and turn it into a professional thing, but it's kind of just online stalking. And you follow their Twitter account, and you look them up on Facebook, and you start to collect some information that helps you deal with that uncertainty. And then the more active way to do it is to find people, talk to people on your team. What do you think? we heard we're going to get this new manager. Do you know who he is or who she is and what their background is? And then the interactive way is to connect with them on LinkedIn and send them a message and say, hey, we heard you're going to be our new manager. Do you want to go out for coffee someday? But it's all about our brain's desire for certainty. And there's ways that we can reduce it instead of just blindly kind of throwing the hands in the air and go, well, let's just do it the Agile way because Agile means we can do whatever we want. There are some strategies for dealing with that.
Yeah. So in the last 2 years, and since you've been on this journey and you're continuing with that, what's been the most surprising thing that you noticed?
I think just the reception to the underlying idea that the conversations are what moves change forward. There's a lot of the stuff in the book and some of the stuff on the website, the canvases and, the blast radius and some of the tools and techniques, they're all, I guess, designed to provoke a conversation. They're not designed like typical change tools, which is here's a survey to send out. And then I'm going to harvest the information, then I'm going to make sense of it, then I'm going to formulate the plan and I'm going to push it out. It's more, get the parties in the room who have to deal with it and sort of get out of their way and let them have the conversation. And some coaches and change people are really good at not needing a distraction technique for it. I like to use those things as a number one, it kind of sells some credibility, that it's a thing now, so you can now use this thing. And I think what I've seen is most of the people who've gone through the workshops, they realize that it can be that simple. It can be that there's ways that we can provoke these conversations, especially when I get more, I guess, traditional people who don't have an Agile background in the courses. So it used to scare me because I do the pre-workshop survey. And I'd get people that have really deep knowledge on the change side and none on the Agile side. And the way they answer some of the questions, kind of gets me into the thought process of they're not going to have a good experience in this course because it sounds like they need the step-by-step and the plan and things like this. So it stresses me out a bit. But the learning has been, it's always, most of the time they know a lot of this stuff underneath, but they get kind of forced into working a certain way because of how organizations run, right? They get measured on how many changes they push through and how many email newsletters they send out and all these types of things. So they kind of get coerced into working a certain way. So learning, it's been really interesting just to see the receptiveness to it, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, really, of the receptiveness, how have you found that in the last 2 years, the network and the movement around lean change and you've obviously, there's been workshops worldwide and the information that you're gathering from that, what is it specifically that has it met the original expectations, or didn't you have any particular expectations or goals or outcomes that you were looking to get from actually releasing the book and starting the workshops?
Oh, it's definitely more than what I would have thought, for sure. I mean, the whole idea started way back in 2009 when I was in a really large organization and ran into a big organizational change wall, and there were like back then it was, I had the Agile values and principles, and I had taken my Scrum certification, and I'd been involved in the community, and then I ran into this problem that was more in the organizational layer. And the only tool I had at the time was to say, well, there's only 4 values, which ones should we decide to not follow? And I was amazed I didn't get fired, because I would have fired me at the time. It's imagine walking into a CFO's office and saying, hey, just be more agile with your balance sheet. You're not going to get very far. So I thought there's got to be more out there, and I wrote a blog post, and it eventually led to a video tutorial on Agile transformation, which I started looking more at some of the OD and the change work. And then in the Lean Change Management book, the company that is in the book was the story that tied all the ideas together. So it was a bunch of ideas waiting for a story to wrap around it, and that was it. It was chapter by chapter. And then I joined the Happy Melly publishing experiment, and we did a Kickstarter campaign. Indiegogo we used, and one person in Germany, Torsten Scheller, had bought the Godfather package, which was just an experiment. So the producer of the book and I just put the experiment out there and said, well, let's do a bunch of levels. So let's see who's gonna fund and back the project. And if they bid this much, then they get a book. And if they bid this tier, then they can get a signed one. And then let's do this Godfather thing. And whoever does the Godfather, we're only going to sell one, but they have an opportunity to arrange a training course based on the book. And I went, oh, okay, sure. That's it. So there was no intent. And then somebody actually bought it, and he emailed me, Torsten emailed me and said, hey, I'm going to set up 2 in Munich. Do you want to come over and do it? I'm like, all right. So I guess I have to build a workshop now. So part of it was just not being smart enough to think too far ahead. And the other part was just the whole idea behind experiments was, well, let's try it out and see what happens. And that's really kind of how it went. So I didn't have any expectations, any other than I thought it would be cool to write a book one day and see what that's like, and then I'll go be a tester on a team again and see what that's like and try something else. But yeah, it worked out pretty well, I think. Yeah.
So I guess for us, and I'm talking here on behalf of my partner as well, that experimentation mindset fits really well with our philosophy around the growth mindset. So that idea that there is no such thing as failure, it's all about validated learning. That's kind of, certainly when I came on the workshop last year, that was what I really liked. It was that freedom to actually do stuff and not be too tied in to a fixed outcome. So coaching, we talk about having an outcome, but it's also about reviewing and understanding, okay, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what made it work, what made it not work, what can I do differently? So that's kind of what I really, really loved about what we did last year on the workshop. So is there something in there about how we manage change in organizations, in inverted commas, that maybe we need to let go of that fixed mindset?
I think maybe not so much let go, but try and help people who need more certainty than others. Because I like to argue the point that if we all had the growth mindset, it would probably be awesome to work in, but we'd be out of business in a week. So somebody's got to be worrying about how to keep the lights on in the place and to deal with the balance sheet and all the good stuff that project managers do and financial people do and stuff. So I think it's finding a good mix, because what I really liked about that the workshop in Perth was that it was a good mix of people. So there was diverse backgrounds, I think, which really made the conversations work very well. Like you guys both brought, like Ro, obviously the coaching part that you brought, and Charlotte, a lot of your experience and change. If that wouldn't have been there, then I think the conversations would have been different. So there were different perspectives. And I love working with people that are detailed planners, because I'm not a strong detailed planner, and it can be frustrating at times, but it forces me to think about things, which is good. So plus the other thing, I get the mindset stuff, but sometimes I wonder if people that value having a fixed mindset for whatever reason feel insulted by it, right? Because you see it everywhere on LinkedIn, and we've got to develop this mindset, and we have to change people's behaviors and mindsets and stuff like this. Well, who says we're right? Who says the growth mindset is the right mindset? And I'm sure there is some psychology studies behind both of those. But yeah, for me, it's always the conversation. If the group has more of a fixed mindset that I'm working with, and they need more of a big plan, then let's make a big plan. And then if it doesn't work, let's figure out how to do it differently next time. Yeah.
So Jason, just one of the questions that's been floating around in my head as well is this. So knowing your background that you came from that Agile side of things, why did you decide to call the book Lean Change and not Agile Change?
Putting lean in front of change management the idea was that I knew the audience was not going to be an agile audience. I knew it was going to be people that are coming more from an OD or a change perspective. And then once they see the lean word in front of change management, it's, oh, what is that? Because I find more in the OD in the change space, lean at the time was more prevalent, so and then mixing in the agile elements later. I debated. I talked with the producer back and forth about what to call it, but eventually it just turned into to put the word lean in front of it. Yeah.
So the question that's just popped into my head then, so if you called it lean for that reason, where does your heart really lie? Is it more agile or lean?
It's hard to say. With how popular Agile is becoming outside of software now, I think there's going to be a lot more emphasis on the Agile word as opposed to the lean word, because I think more people are getting exposed to Agile projects in their organizations or Agile transformations. So the word is front and center. And for me, it's not. It's elements of both, because even in Agile software, there's a lot of lean techniques that are brought in some of the Agile methods out there. So I kind of see them as interchangeable. It's not a big deal for me, but there's some purists that, lean is one thing and Agile is another thing, and you cannot mix them together. And why not? we make the rules. We don't have to follow something because somebody used one word as opposed to the other.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's happening, and we're seeing it very much in Australia, is obviously that move to Agile, but also the agility rather than Agile software development per se, but they're using Agile software development as a way to bring about disruption in their organisations. And so from your experience that you've seen, not just necessarily in Canada, but from some of the other global facilitators, where do you see that how's that working? Have you seen examples of where using scaling Agile and moving Agile outside of just software? How have you seen that work really well so far, or what's your sort of take on that?
I think it's becoming more popular. I've worked with marketing teams. I've worked with change teams, HR teams that are all applying certain types of Agile practices, I guess. And change teams that are trying to move towards, incremental delivery of transformation programs, and they're all kind of following the same, I guess, iterative or Scrum-like pattern, which is very much based on something that I really like, which is the Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, or the 12-week year. And those are basically ideas that don't come from Agile. They come from the business world about just good ways to run your business, right? Take an annual goal, break it down into quarterly goals, break it down into monthly goals, and then decide the top 3 things we need to do this week to get towards that monthly goal, and follow that and retrospect. And that's very much what Scrum is. So I think the organizations I've seen that do it well, they do well because we start with the values and the principles of Agile and get that out of the way completely, because it can be, it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective, how overwhelming was it to see all this Agile stuff on LinkedIn and get introduced to the different methods and processes? Was it fairly, oh my God, look how big this thing is and look how many terms and words and methods there are out there? Was it kind of overwhelming for you guys?
No, I don't think so. For me, I think just coming back to the values and the principles, just keep coming back to that. And regardless of whether it's Scrum or XP or whatever way that people want to approach it, there is a lot of simplicity there. And I think that's where obviously the visualization and also the use of the tools to generate conversation is really where the power is. So when I first looked at the whole Agile, well, it just made, for me, it made sense and was simple, which, I think organizations tend to overcomplicate things. and this, if you keep it simple, even in a world of complexity, you have to, because otherwise we get overwhelmed. Our brains just can't take all of that information in and process it, and so we end up often, going from one thing to the other and not actually achieving what we really wanted to achieve. And so I didn't find it overwhelming for me. It just clicked.
Okay.
So for me, it was being a bit of a cynic. I just thought, well, first of all, I really love the Agile manifesto and the principles. They really speak to me, having spent many years in an IT organisation or organisations. But what really struck me was that there's nothing new under the sun. A lot of the stuff that, all of the tools, the techniques, the processes that Agile uses, and there are many of them, they are stuff that has been adapted from stuff that's been around for donkey's years. And I guess the thing for me is that it breeds sort of people who become evangelists for a certain way of doing things, which you see happen with any kind of thing. And one of the guys who was on our very first workshop, Jess, he said something which it always stays in my mind: go back to the source, go back to the manifesto and the principles. That's all you really need to know. And then anything that you want to do is then just a means of actually achieving that manifesto and those principles. So I think people, I agree, they overcomplicate it, and in that overcomplication they actually make it worse for themselves. Go back to the source. What does the manifesto say? What do the principles say? That's kind of what you need to know. Everything else is icing on the cake.
Yeah. So I find the marketing group that I worked with for about a year, they had sent a few people on Scrum Master training because IT was going Agile. So they thought, well, let's go send those people there. Because a lot of people, they associate Agile with Scrum, even though Scrum is one of 50 different types of ideas and methods and frameworks and tools and stuff. And they came back and said, no, it was a waste of time because it's all software based. So they didn't get a lot out of it. Like, we don't estimate features, and we don't use velocity and story points, and we're not building stuff. And so we did our own. So I just designed a one-day kind of Agile Explained class and started off with 2 exercises around the values and principles, which basically just helps them relate their most successful projects with attributes of the manifesto that they used before. And they realize that, we already kind of work this way. So mechanically, what would it look like if we did it? So then it's get into, well, here's what the Scrum framework is, and here's what Kanban is, and here's what some of the basic applied elements of the values and principles are. So what would we do? Well, let's work in week-long sprints. And we'll work on 1 epic a week, and then we'll do a stand-up every day and a demo and a retrospective at the end of the week. And that's it. They don't have to fully transform. They don't have to reorg their organization. They can just work in an iterative way where, in software, there's a big difference between working iteratively and working in an agile way. And the differences are, Agile, there's no titles, there's no responsibilities. It's a team committing to a goal and getting that done. And iterative is more, we're just kind of, doing what's called Scrum or Fall, which is we're doing just waterfall inside of these 1 week or 2 week long sprints.
Yeah.
But I find outside of software, if you start with the values and the principles, it's a lot easier to digest, like you said, and then people go, oh, okay, so, if we just do that and we put some stickies on the wall and meet in front of it every day, let's see what happens. That's it. You can just start that simple and then start to change and add things as you move along. Yeah.
And I guess in that way, you're creating a movement in the organisation, because then that starts the conversation, doesn't it? Because people go, "Ooh, what is it you're doing there?" And then they can tell their story, and they go, "Oh, that's interesting. What if we did?" And so in that way, it kind of develops its own ecology. You get this sort of ecosystem just developing on its own, rather than somebody coming in and saying, okay, we're now going to go agile. The CEO standing up and saying, we're now an agile organization, without really understanding what that means. Because the consequences to saying we're an agile organization. Yeah.
As soon as the person who's pushing stops pushing, it doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
So there needs to be a what's in it for, sometimes you need it to get over the hump. Like one large organization I worked in, nobody was going to do anything unless the bosses told them. That's just the culture they had built. It was very much top down, very old school. So we needed to put a little more horsepower in to say, well, here's how the process works and we're going to try it. So just go do it. And then, over a period of time, a few people started seeing the benefits. A lot of people thought it was just dumb, but at least they tried it out and they got through the grown zone. And then if it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it wasn't the right thing.
Yeah. So conscious of time, Jason. So, we had a bit of a reflection on the looking back, some of the things that you've liked, some of the things you've learned. So what sort of actions, or how do you see the next sort of 12 months? I know, you said before it was just another experiment. So what's the next experiment in terms of that you're looking at in the next, 12 months to 2 years? So if we were talking again in 2 years' time, what would that look like for you?
The two main things, one is the network. So it's the global network that there's not a lot of information out there right now, but I know you guys know a little bit more about it than the general public right now. So, but it's more about, I find that the network is going to help build a stronger global community about people who are using Agile and Lean approaches in any change capacity. So whether it's IT change or transformational change, but getting away from some of these, 20-year-old step-by-step linear practices, but making the network more about helping people get unstuck. So I find a lot of conferences I go to, you get your beliefs reinforced. So if I'm an Agile practitioner, I go to an Agile conference and I've got some Agile thought leaders on stage, or, authors and world-renowned consultants. They're saying stuff I already believe. And I go there and I'm like, yes, I'm right. And everyone else is crazy because they don't believe this. But it's not helping me go back to my organization where everybody is opposite to that. And I've got to figure out how to, not change them, but understand what's important to them. So this network is going to be much more about collaboration. It's going to be run by, myself and the facilitators, where we can kind of help people figure out how to help take the organizations where they want to go. So it's not going to be tied to a method or a practice, but just a lot of the stuff that we've gone through in the workshops. And then that's going to lead into one day unstuck workshops. So things where, as much as I would like to go into a company and take their money for 6 months by being there every day, it's not really helpful. So how can we do things like quarterly get unstuck workshops? So come in for a day with the leadership team, go through this exercise, and then say, birdies, go fly. And we'll come back a week before the quarter is out. We'll do a retrospective and we'll do another intervention. So just kind of interventions, I guess, are the network and interventions, because I think those are the things that help people get unstuck from the change. It's not so much the big linear plan, but it's every so often, maybe it's quarterly, depending on what type of transformational change it is, but something has to come in and shake the place up a bit. Yes. So, so those are the two main things, and then just growing the network more. Yep.
Fantastic.
So obviously, as in Australia, we've got quite a good network, and we've got a number of different facilitators. I'm just interested, for other people across the globe, where are the other key areas that you're seeing, the growth in terms of that networking facilitator group?
Germany has been a strong audience. South America is starting to emerge a little bit, but I would say it's Australia definitely number one, and Europe probably a close, relatively close number two. North America, not so much. There's pockets, but again, it's becoming more popular with some of the big change vendors and associations, but it's coming from a stance of let's create a closed door think tank of experts to create the ideal Agile change process, and then make a certification out of it and make a standard practice out of it and push it out. Which I don't think is it's a license to print money for sure, but I don't think it's helping the community, because there's a lot of really bright people that are involved in the North American communities, but they're not challenged to think about anything. They wait for the professional association to tell them what they should learn and how they should learn it. And I want this network to be the opposite. So I would see kind of outside of North America definitely taking the lead on growing it. And then at some point, people in North America will wake up. We're really tied to our more traditional approaches and standards and things. And I think the rest of the world's a little more open-minded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So picking up on that self-directed learning then, what's one thing that, people can do listening to this podcast today or watching this podcast? What's one thing that they can do to help them either start their lean change journey or to continue their lean change journey?
I would say connect through the website. So go to leanchange.org and get on the mailing list, because it's virtual courses are going to be launching soon. So places where you guys can't travel or I can't travel for whatever reason, we can facilitate them remotely, which will help grow the network. Plus, there's lots of stories up there. So it's not just about the book and the ideas, but it's people who reach out and say, hey, I tried this thing and I didn't do it the way you do it. I changed these 3 things about it and here's how it worked. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's exactly the story that I want to tell. So I know Charlotte has a post up there from a story. It's over a year, I think.
I know.
Yeah.
I need to get some. Yeah, I definitely need to come back on that, because I'm actually still working with that organisation. So,
cool.
Yeah, so be interesting to see this next phase, because there's some more work coming from them. So definitely, and a couple of other organisations that I'm really going to have the opportunity to do some experiments with. So I think the last 6 months have been focused very much on travelling around Australia and New Zealand with the workshops. And then, going forward, we're still going to do that in 2017, but again, interspersed with some of that hands-on use of the tools and starting the conversations with organisations, because there's definitely an appetite now in Australia and New Zealand to do that. So for both Ro and I, that's really about continuing on that journey and really expanding that and taking the opportunities as they come along, which are definitely showing up in Australia now.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, because I think the stories is really what makes it work. So just being able to connect with so many people from all over the world, and the people who've written guest posts. I think I've had about 7 people now that have written posts, and it's I think that's how our organizations make progress, right? They hear something another company tried and they think it worked, so they copy it.
Yeah.
And the first thing we do is change people to say, you can't copy it because it's the culture. You can't copy someone else's culture. You can copy a practice they tried, but you can't replicate the success or anything. But that's what they're going to do anyway. They're going to read a case study and go, oh, I want to try that. So who's an expert in this? Oh, Biff? Well, here, we're going to hire Biff and you do what you did over there.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But they're going to learn something and then they're going to tweak it next time.
Yes.
So the stories is what's going to make it work. I had someone come through a workshop in Toronto who he said, we didn't, with one client he worked with, they didn't use the word experiments because their leadership team didn't like it. When we experiment, things blow up. Yeah. So they just called them change activities or stuff to do.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, but they used canvases and they had a big visible wall and they tweaked it and made it work in their environment. And I think that's what the network and the stories are going to help people do. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, just to build a better workplace.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's enough tools, methods, knowledge, and all that stuff out there that let's start to move away from talking about urgency and all this stuff and start to move towards purpose. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of the network and the stories are going to help people realize that there's things that are more important than, let's create urgency and force change through on people.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. So final thought from you then, Jason, in terms of this retrospective today. What have you learned about yourself?
That's a good question. What have I learned about myself? Might have to edit some of this now.
Well, you're right. We're not live.
I think just letting go of control more than anything else. Because I think I've posted this a few times. I am a self-professed kind of control freak. So going through this whole thought process of learning all these ideas and connecting with so many other people helped me not get so stressed out about trying to control change. Because early on it was very much around, why don't these idiots in this organization get it, which every change person goes through. You never say it out loud, but it's just, you see the same patterns of the same problems over and over again. And when you hit it for the 30th time, you're just like, oh, for God's sake. So for me, it's more it's helped me let go of the outcome, which is coaching 101, which of course I didn't know early on in my career. And then I would learn these things through you guys and other people that have gone through the workshops. So just learn to let go and help them come up with options, because I find they know how to solve their own problems. They just need somebody to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And then all the tools and the techniques and combining things together were just basically how to make a lot of complex change models and frameworks and techniques accessible to people who aren't in the industry, because they don't care about the cotters and the ad cars and the agiles and all this stuff. They want to know what's in them. So how to simplify.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, hopefully you will let us keep that in the edited version, because I think that's a really powerful message for everybody to hear who works in change. Letting go of control, letting go of outcome.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So just bringing our conversation and retrospective to a close then. First of all, I want to say a huge thank you for sharing your thoughts today, Jason. We really appreciate that. And also from Charlotte and I to say a huge thank you for allowing us to be part of the network. Over the last 6 months, we've had a blast, and we're really excited about what you're going to do with the network in the future. And hopefully we'll be back in 2 years to do another retrospective. We've all got to then. So thanks very much for coming along today.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Thanks for setting this up. I appreciate it.
Not a problem.